looks like the federal government had made up its mind.
Tonight, skepticism over the federal government's pipeline approval.
Are we able to share our stories? Absolutely not. They want to send us this cash and make us go away.
A deadline draws near for a group lobbying for a new 60-scoop settlement.
Waiting for parts and finding parts for the older hand crank machines, but the old Singer machine.
And the Stichin Gwichin keeps a thread of twitchin'. Good evening. Welcome to the APTN National News. I'm Beverly Andrews. The British Columbia government has asked the highest court in the province if it has the authority to regulate heavy oil transport by issuing permits. If it did, the NDP government could have the power to decide what and how much flows through the proposed Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. APTN's Tina House has this story.
In January, the BC government announced it would use every tool in their toolbox to hinder the Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain expansion project. Now that fight is being taken to the province's Court of Appeal.
Our approach to this reference is to ask the BC Court of Appeal to review proposed amendments to BC's Environmental Management Act. The amendments would give the province authority to place a permit with conditions before permitting hazardous substances into the province above a specified minimum level.
Alberta Premier Rachel Notley says she's cautiously optimistic in light of BC's latest chess move.
What we are suggesting is that we're not too worried. As long as they're prepared to abide by the rule of law, we're confident in what the rule of law already is, which is that they don't have that jurisdiction.
Meanwhile, in Vancouver, members of Protect the Inlet stormed the constituency office of Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. She wasn't there at the time, but 30 people carrying banners and signs wanted to send a message that they need her support to oppose the pipeline from being built.
We're scared, and we're telling her that this is not acceptable, that if she's going to represent the youth and the people, that she has to do it with our futures in mind, not the profit, but the future and the safety of the people. This pipeline is not safe, so we're here standing up.
The Union of BC Indian Chiefs, along with the Wilderness Committee and Greenpeace, are also preparing to stand up against Kinder Morgan. They announced they received some insider information that the approval of the pipeline was rigged and are asking for a full investigation.
It's a matter of record now that Kinder Morgan was lobbying the federal government heavily to approve the pipeline. What's wrong with this whole story is it now looks like the federal government had made up its mind, had directed its bureaucrats to start preparing for the pipeline before and during consultations with First Nations and with the general public. In plain language, that meant the fix was in.
There are gaps in our knowledge. These were identified in a 2015 report by the Royal Society of Canada. We need to fill those gaps in knowledge to inform regulations that will protect BC's interests, particularly on bitumen behavior in water and differing weather conditions and geographic conditions.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A number of 60 Scoops adoptees and survivors from across Canada are gearing up for an upcoming court date for their proposed $800 million settlement. A group from Manitoba is preparing to oppose the agreement in principle. And as Brittany Hobson shows us, they're traveling to great lengths to get support.
Colleen Rajat is getting ready to take on the federal government. Rajat is president of a group of Manitoba 60s Scoop survivors and adoptees, and the group is headed to court to oppose the proposed $800 million settlement Justin Trudeau's government announced last fall.
Trying to give a voice to people that don't have a voice. And we have a voice, and we're going to use it.
For the past 6 weeks, the 60 Scoop adoptee has been traveling across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta to gather signatures to oppose the settlement.
What we're finding is that many 60 Scoop survivors who live on the res or in remote communities do not have Wi-Fi, do not have phones, do not have cable or satellite. They have no idea what is going on with this proposed settlement.
In the settlement, survivors could see anywhere between $25,000 to $50,000 each. Survivor Cameron Longo says while the money may be tempting, survivors should familiarize themselves with the agreement.
When you think the term 25 to 50, you're thinking 50,000. What can I do with $50,000? But as time went on and then it started unraveling and stuff, you realize that the government wasn't really being transparent.
One of the main concerns the group has is lawyers could be getting around $75 million. That's about 10% of the $800 million settlement. But Rajat says it's not just about the money. It's about giving people the opportunity to put their stories on record.
Are we able to share our stories? Absolutely not. They want to send us this cash and make us go away, and Canadians really do need to understand the true impact of the 60 Scoop.
Longo hopes that something similar to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission can take place.
We need something like that for 60 Scoop survivors, because it seems the general consensus is that, oh, we were adopted in white homes. What could have been bad about that? You had money, you had food, you got to travel and this and that, but they don't know the loss of culture, the loss of identity, the loss of not knowing your language or your family.
The group has until April 30th to collect signatures. They head to court in Saskatoon on May 10th. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
It's been over a year since a flood damaged southern Manitoba First Nation. 170 band members were forced out of their homes. Some of them are still in a hotel in a nearby town. Mel Hansen brings us their story.
A year ago, these houses on Long Plain First Nation were partially underwater. About 2,000 people live on the reserve next door to Portage la Prairie, about 70 kilometers west of Winnipeg.
A lot of these roads were impassable. It was just basically swamp. So we had to declare a state of emergency for this particular area and evacuate quite a few people.
Chief Dennis Meaches is referring to the 2017 spring floods that forced 170 people into a local hotel. This is the second natural disaster Long Plain First Nation had seen. In July 2016, a tornado touched down in the community, evacuating hundreds and putting a financial strain on the reserve, while they wait to be reimbursed by Indigenous Services Canada.
We still have to do some reconciliation on the tornado. I don't think to me, it's still unfinished business.
According to the chief, 22 people are still not home, 4 from the tornado, 18 from the flood. He says holds on funding by the feds are keeping band members displaced.
It's going to cost a considerable amount. It's well over $2 million, the project, from what we understand, and we've already spent considerable amount of money on it. So we're hoping that by fall, September, October, for the remaining evacuees to have that job completed.
A handful of the remaining evacuees are children. They are getting bused back to Long Plain for school. Meanwhile, the band spent over $4 million on fixing these roads and a new drainage system to protect the homes from future flooding.
Over the years, we recognized that the roads were pretty poor condition. Traditionally, I think further back marsh area, so we had a lot of drainage coming through this area.
The road construction should be wrapping up at the end of June. Meaches is hopeful that the Long Plain will be paid back for the work they've done soon. However, ISC said by email the tornado evacuees should be home by December 2018. But they couldn't say when the flood victims would be home. For APTN National News, Mel Hansen.
After the break, we'll find out how a women's group in Quebec plans to tackle bullying and instill cultural pride in youth. But first, tomorrow's weather outlook. Plus 16 and cloudy in St. John's, more cloud in Halifax, plus 14. Kuujjuaq sunny and minus 9. Cartwright has some rain, plus 3. Cloudy in Saguenay and plus 6. More cloud and plus 13 in Montreal. North Bay is 0 and cloudy. Some cloud in Toronto and plus 9. Sunny in most of northern Ontario. Thunder Bay is plus 7. Kapuskasing plus 2. Churchill plus 10 with showers. Sunny and plus 18 in the Pas. Sunny plus 18 for Dauphin. Sun and plus 16 in Winnipeg. Yorkton is sunny and plus 20. More sun in Saskatoon at plus 24. Cloudy in Stony Rapids plus 8. Sun and plus 23 in La Ronge. A Nunavut teacher convicted of multiple sex crimes against his young students has been sentenced. Johnny Miko will receive more than 2 times what the Crown had asked for. Johnny Miko was convicted on 14 counts of abusing students in the Nunavut community of Sanha-Kilawak between 1972 and 2007. Most of the 8 confirmed victims were his grade 3 students. His defense had asked for 2-year sentence. The Crown asked for 3. The judge overrode both and sentenced him to 8 years. The Quebec Native Women's Association has launched a campaign for the well-being of Indigenous youth. It's a strategy plan to stop bullying and promote cultural pride. After 1 year in the making with different partners, the association is inviting youth to participate. The activities range from online hashtag MyIndigenousCulture to inspiring videos, online tools, and information sharing plays, among other activities. Jennifer Brazeau hopes that with this project, the youth will learn to use their culture to overcome obstacles and resolve conflict in a positive way.
We decided to take a different approach to the typical bullying prevention campaign. Instead, we decided to make sure that we focus on the positive approach to it and to also take into consideration the complexities of Indigenous youth lives, that it goes farther than just the bullying itself, that there's other issues in their lives that are affecting their well-being, and we wanted to make sure that we address that too in the project.
Tonight, right after the news, APTN Investigates bring you the story, Racism in the Ranks, about Canada's national policing force that's rooted in colonization. The RCMP have acknowledged racism, but what are they doing about it? Tina Roach joins us from Halifax. Trina, what will we be seeing on your episode tonight?
Hi, Beverly. Tonight the episode is called Racism in the Ranks. This started for me in February. APTN, we had reported on an RCMP officer posting on Facebook a comment about Colton Bushy. Too bad the kid died, but he got what he deserved. And that comment really sort of sparked the question for me, like, why are we still seeing racism in the ranks? We had the former commissioner of the RCMP in 2015, stand before the Assembly of First Nation Chiefs and say, "I know there are racists on the force. There's no room for racism on the force." And so it was just a question of why and what happens, because part of my coverage of that story was that we don't know what happens to officers who make inappropriate comments or racist comments. There's the RCMP says that they investigate, that there's a reprimand, or that it's dealt with, but the public doesn't know because the RCMP falls under the Privacy Act because it's federal. So when I'm talking to people, lawyers and former police and investigators, they're saying, that's not true. They're using it as an excuse to not release information, and that they should be accountable to the public and transparent in how they deal with the transgressions of their officers. And so it's a real exploration. And of course, when you start talking about systemic racism in the justice system, in any aspect of the justice system for Indigenous people, there's a whole history to that. So we do get into that as well, some of the history of the RCMP and what it looks like for Indigenous people, their experience in policing. And so we think of, Neil Stonechild, Ipper Wash. There's sort of those iconic moments, whether it's the front lines, and the experience there, or whether it's comments on Facebook. So we just sort of take a look at it all.
All right, well, thank you, Trina. It sounds really interesting, and we look forward to seeing it.
All right, thanks, Beverly.
Coming up after the break, we go to the Northwest Territories and visit the only person who repairs sewing machines. And it seems business is surging. But first, let's take a look at the rest of tomorrow's weather. Partly cloudy in Peace River, plus 18. Fort Chipewyan, plus 10, also cloudy. Edmonton is a sunny, plus 26. Lethbridge, also sunny, plus 25. Rain in Vancouver at plus 12. Chance of showers in Kamloops, and plus 21. Sunny in Prince Rupert, plus 9. Cloud in Fort Nelson, also plus 9. Cloud cover in the Yukon. Old Crow is at plus 8. Whitehorse, plus 5. Sunny and plus 2 in Norman Wells. Partly cloudy in Yellowknife at plus 6. Sax Harbor is a sunny -17, more sun in Inuvik -1. Cloud cover in Repulse Bay -11, 0 and more cloud in Whale Cove. Sunny and -12 in Clyde River, -11 and partly cloudy in Iqaluit. A new performance in Edmonton is celebrating the 125th year of Ukrainian settlement in Canada. Ancestors and Elders showcases the similarities of the struggles and triumphs between Ukrainian and Indigenous cultures. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to the co-writers of the show.
Ancestors and Elders is a very large-scale production. It features over 100 performers. It tells the story of two separate families from 3 generations of women, grandmother, daughter, and granddaughter. One family is Indigenous, the other Ukrainian. Co-writer Barry Belinsky has a unique perspective. He has Métis, Cree, and Ukrainian heritage. He says there are many similarities between the two cultures.
There's a lot of similarities. The history of Ukrainian culture in Canada has there's been a large amounts of oppression, trying to stay together, being separated, not being able to speak their language, which is all things that resonate from the Native community as well.
The story goes from the present back to the past. The 6 women from 2 different cultures. We see the beginnings of how their dance took root and evolved.
We follow them as they go through this culture festival, so where we see these big displays of Ukrainian and Indigenous culture at certain festivals. But as we're doing that, we shift back into the past. And we start to see, well, what are these dances rooted in? Why did they develop the way that they did? And so we get a hint of the Ukrainian history of settlement. We get a hint of the Indigenous story of this territory.
Co-writer-director Joseph Hoffman says the journey in this production is to teach and pass on knowledge, the grandmother to her daughter.
Both of those women together, the mother and grandmother, have to work together to really empower their daughters to find who they are and root themselves in their community, in their culture, in their tradition.
The production has cast some of the best dancers, from Ukrainian shumka dancing to Cree powwow dancing, 2 very different styles that, when put together, combine into a unique experience. Ancestors and Elders is performing April 27th and 28th at the Jubilee Auditorium in Edmonton. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Sewing and quilting in the Northwest Territories is not just a hobby. For many, it's a livelihood. But what happens when that machine breaks? APTN reporter Charlotte Moore Jacobs sat down with the only sewing machine tech in the Territories.
This sewing machine looks good, but the reverse has stopped working, and it's up to Roger Fraser to fix it.
Your tension is good, your machine is sewing good.
Known as the Stichin Gwichin, he is the one to call when a machine breaks down in the Northwest Territories. After years of sending sewing machines down south, Fraser and his wife traveled down to Texas to take a course on how to fix machines. At first, the retired wildlife officer was just looking to keep busy, but in a year and a half since opening shop, he's quickly become a hot commodity.
It's going to take me 2 hours and then put it back together. This one here, I just did a test on it. The reverse is not working.
The Stichin Gwichin is the only person in the NWT who fixes machines, and sometimes he doesn't even have a manual for them. He has been known to fix up to 4 machines a day. His most valued tool of the trade, a Q-tip.
Get them all in the little crevices and make sure it's clean.
Next up, a 1930s singer from Inuvik. For this tech, he says the biggest challenge faced so far is getting parts.
Waiting for parts and finding parts for the older hand crank machines, but the old Singer machines. It's really finding those parts. So it's I go on eBay. I go on. I have a sewing supplier that they're located in Toronto.
Before his business opened, the cost of sending a machine down south was often more than the cost of servicing. and customers are thrilled, like Marilyn McGurran.
You have 6 months of winter, so there has to be something for people to do, and sewing is really big.
McGurran uses her long-arm quilting machine as a business venture, allowing for clients to keep their northern quilts in the north to be sewn up. But when a spring on her equipment broke, she turned to the Stichin Gwichin.
He said, I don't know how to fix that machine. I've never touched one. I've never worked on one. I said, that's okay. You can fix it. I know you can fix it.
Fraser says he hopes to travel to all the NWT regions to host repair workshops in the future. Until then, he'll keep northern sewers happy, one stitch at a time. Charlotte Moore Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Canada's Environment Minister and the British High Commissioner to Canada made an announcement about the long-lost Franklin expedition. We bring you the story from CTV.
It was a secret the sea had kept for nearly 150 years, and a discovery, great cause for celebration. The HMS Terror and HMS Erebus, better known as the Franklin expedition, got trapped in Arctic ice in 1845 during Franklin's search for a Northwest Passage. The ships were found just a few years ago, 20 meters under Nunavut's Terror Bay. And today, those ships were gifted to Canada and the Inuit community by the United Kingdom.
I'm delighted that we've got an agreement which respects all of those different communities and allows us to continue with the work to find out more about this incredible story and remove some of the mysteries that still exist.
You can actually see it there just beside the diver.
Mysteries that Canadian archaeologists are very anxious to solve.
For example, this year we'll be doing a lot of work around Franklin's cabin because we know that there is potential for high-profile items to be located there.
Many of those items are currently on display here in Ottawa, but they all belong to the UK. This exhibit landed at the Canadian Museum of History just last month, but it's only here for a short time before it travels to a couple of stops in the US, then heads back to the UK.
There are thousands of artifacts on the ship, and that we will be doing exploration this summer, which is very exciting.
The Inuit will play a large part in that exploration, since it was the Inuit who helped find the Franklin ships. Now they're pushing the federal government to help them fund a museum in Nunavut to reflect that history.
It's northern history, it's Arctic history, it's Canadian history, so it's really important for our northern residents to also be part of that history.
Joanne Schnurr, CTV News.
Before we leave you tonight, we have an interesting photo to share with you. Our reporter Brittany Hobson was on vacation for the last few weeks. We won't tell you where she was, but you can probably guess. If you have any photos that you would like to share with us, email them to aptn.ca, or you can use the hashtag APTNnews. And that wraps up another week at the APTN National News. Please stay with us for the new episode of APTN Investigates Racism in the Ranks, airing in just a few minutes. I'm Beverly Andrews. Have a great weekend.